So I was playing Guardians of the Galaxy, the video game, the other day, and noticed this incredible loading screen transition that they've put into the game. And I thought to myself, hey, I can definitely recreate this in Blender. Okay, so this is going to be a multi-part project. I will be putting chapter selections on this YouTube video to help make it a little bit easier for you guys to navigate the idiosyncratic parts of this project. Right, let's get started. First part is going to be modeling. The modeling is not too difficult. This is the way that I have modeled for the end result of this project, but if you find an easier method, by all means use that. So what we're going to do is, by the way, down here in the corner you're going to see all the keys and button presses I'm doing. Make a note of those. Shift A is the first thing we're going to be doing. We're going to be getting in a mesh that is a circle. Now you might be wondering, circle, that's not a triangle. Well, we can turn it into a triangle by bringing the vertices down to 3. Bam, triangle is there and ready for us. What we're going to do from here is, because at the moment there is basically no mesh, there is just 3. If we go into edit mode by pressing tab, you get 1 vertice, 2 vertice, 3 vertice. Vertice, that's the word, vertice. Okay, what we're going to do from here is stay in edit mode. We want to go to vertex select mode, which is one of the 3 options at the top here. Make sure you're in that mode. You can see vertice 1, vertice 2, vertice 3. Press Ctrl R, that creates a loop cut. Wherever you click, you can see a kind of highlight where the loop cut or added vertice is going to be going. We want to be making several loop cuts on this object. So we're going to make one at the bottom. We're going to make, bring it up to 2, because we want 2 loop cuts. Press Ctrl R again, and 2 again, and the same on the third side of the triangle. So we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more vertices, and of course the ones at the end. What do we want to do now? We want to bring these vertices more towards, if I could do a drawing, that would be great. Yeah, more towards this way. So we're going to be bringing the vertices down, if that makes sense. And if I rub that out. So how do we do that? Make sure you're in vertex selection mode, edit mode again. So drag select these 2 vertices. Press G once to grab them. Press G again for them to slide along their axes. And you can either eyeball it as close as you would like, or you can press 0.5 into your keypad, push enter, and that moves them ½ meter in the positive direction for those vertices sliding along their own lines, at which point we can actually, if we wanted to, delete this vertice. And now you can start to see we're getting that cut-off edge that we had for the loading screen in Guardians of the Galaxy. So what we're going to do is drag highlight these 2 again, G twice again, and 0.5. And again, dissolving or deleting that vertice at the top. Now this one's going to be tricky because the direction of positive and negative is slightly different, but we'll see how we go. G again twice, 0.5. Again, that's worked nicely. Depending on your orientation, you might find one of them goes in the wrong direction. If you do find that, then you can simply do one at a time, or do minus 0.5 for the movement, and you'll find that that should work pretty much okay. Push enter, at which point we can dissolve the vertice here, and we are completely done with the modeling portion of this project. If you ended up at this point, you should have, if you press 7 on your numpad, a nice even cut off cornered triangle. Okay, so what's step number 2 in this process. Step number 2 is to use a little bit of geometry nodes to create the 3D. Rather than just having vertices, we need a lot of 3D geometry around these 3 lines, these 3 edges of the object, so we can actually have that cut off triangle look. So make sure your circle is selected up here, go back into object mode, and then go up to geometry nodes at the top and press new down the bottom. That creates a geometry nodes modifier, and you get your geometry nodes workspace here. Now what we can do is just zoom this in so we can see what we're doing up the top right here, and then on the left we want to take the geometry, and there's a couple of things we want to be doing. First of all, we want to be, it seems a little bit counterintuitive, we want to convert this mesh, so these 6 vertices, into a curve object, and then we want to convert it back, and I'll show you the reason why we're doing that. So do Shift A, we want to search for mesh to curve, and we get this, plug that into our selection, so now we have a curve object. Make sure you have enough area in your workspace, you can zoom out and drag things around as you would normally. Next, we want a curve to mesh. So we've converted it to a curve, we're now converting it back to a mesh. Why do we do that? Because we now get the option of profile curve. So what that means is, when we're converting it back into a mesh, do we want to give it some 3D depth? And we do, and we can do that. There's many options, but we can do that just with a curve circle object. So we get the curve circle here. Now this is going to slightly explode on this screen, but I'll show you in a moment. If we put that into the profile curve rather, we end up with 3 cylinders. Now what we can do with that is fill the ends and bring this radius right down 0.001. That's far too thin, but you get the impression of what we're trying to achieve here. So we perhaps want to go 0.008. You can make it a little bit thicker than that, 0.01. Maybe bring that up a little bit more, but essentially that's the basis of the cylinders that are going to inhabit the space of our object. 0.005, that's a little bit too thick for my liking. 0.03, that's probably perfect for what I want. We can also change the resolution, so we can have it's triangular, or in fact we can have it as squares. That's probably what I'm going to leave it at, just have a little bit of angular stuff on there. We want to shade smooth, so we do set shade smooth as the next one along, and that's just going to add a little bit here and there to this object. And what we end up with at the end of step 2, just a few nodes, is the filled in 3D geometry we're going to be using for the rest of this tutorial. Okay, so the next step in our process is the array, creating these objects instanced along a line on the y-axis, and we're going to go with 10 meters, which is a good length. So what do we need to do for this? First of all is we need 2 extra things in our scene. We want to do Shift A, create a curve line. We want to make sure it's going 10 meters on the y-axis. Everything else can be kept at default, so click out of that, come out of edit mode, and you'll see you have a line of 10 meters. What we then also need is Shift A, empty plane axis, which will come in at our world origin, and that's all we need for the next step. So we select our triangle object, which is what we applied the geometry nodes to, and we want to add an array modifier, at which point you'll notice it will put another instance of the object along the x-axis. We actually want it along the y. So we zero out the factor on the x-axis. And we actually want this along the y. So if you push 1, you get 1 instance. If we do 10 meters, we have a spacing of 1 meter, and we have a count of 2. We want to actually put that to 10. You can, of course, put it to more. It's kind of up to you how you'd like to use it. What do we want as well? We want not just a fixed count of 10, we want it all the way along the line. So we do actually a fit curve, and we use the eyedropper to select the line from our collection at the top left, or we click on the object in the scene. At which point, along the whole length of our line object, we get an instance of our triangle object. Perfect. Next thing we want to do is make it so each object is rotating a little bit more than the last. How do we do that? We do an object offset. We tick the box for that and we select our empty. And again, nothing has happened at the moment, but we align our view just with the front-facing part of the scene, and we start to rotate our object along the y-axis. You'll notice that we end up with a nice little rotation going on. Now you can rotate this as much as you like. You could do it subtly, so you could do something like only 5, 6 or less than 10 degrees. I found, for my purposes, 90 is pretty good. It rotates it a nice even amount, and actually at the end of your cycle you come back to your default triangle right at the end. So if we put our camera here, our viewport rather, we can see that that would create this array as we would need it. Again, the factor that you're going to be rotating is kind of up to you. I am doing it by 90 each time, or roughly 90, and adjust it how you see fit. So where we got to go from here is we want this to continue. We want to make it perhaps a loop in our scene. If we're doing a video, we don't want it to seem like it suddenly cuts out. So for instance, if we actually bring a camera into our scene, so Shift A, camera, and you'll notice that it, if you press 0 on your numpad, you'll get what your camera is looking at. So we can actually bring this back slightly. So we can start somewhere like here, for instance, could be a good starting point. And we could apply all of the transformations to our camera object. Again, set up the camera how you like. You can have it so its perspective is slightly more zoomed in or zoomed out. That's kind of up to you. Bearing in mind that the more zoomed out, the more warped things are likely to look. Again, you can probably change this over time. And we probably want to make it so things don't clip out and in quite as much. So just adjust these values slightly. That should probably work. We've got a basic scene. You shouldn't have too much trouble with the performance when you're rendering this, especially if you're using something like Eevee, but we'll be tackling that in a later step. So we have a whole collection. We probably want to bring our camera outside of this collection. So this could be renamed, F2 for renaming, base, maybe we call that base. So that includes the line, the empty, and the triangle object. So what we can now do is Shift A, collection instance, base, and we can push this along by 10 meters. At which point we do have a bit of a double here, but I'm not sure if that's going to be too noticeable. we have another instance of our base collection on the right hand side. And if we look through our camera, we have many more objects. Again, you could probably lower this location slightly to make an overlap of the two objects if you wanted to. I'm going to just leave it at 10. We'll see how that looks in the final render. You could always tweak your settings slightly. What we can do again is another collection instance, another base, and move this to 20 meters. And we end up with a nice little cycle. Again, if you're going to apply some volume to your scene, which I'll show you how to do later on, it shouldn't be too noticeable when the loop begins and ends. We could probably bring this in slightly, just to make sure it's not too obvious. Maybe starting about minus. We could start at 1 meter, 0 meters rather. And then it would be a complete loop. Maybe we'll just leave it at that, see how that gets on. And make sure you're always saving your project in a blend file. So that's the array part done. What we then want to do, just as a little tidbit, we want to be moving this by 10 meters. So let's start setting that up now. So we want to be moving our camera along our line, along the y-axis by 10 meters by the end of the animation. You could do something like, if we want to make it quick, we're perhaps looking at 240 frames for the animation. And what you want to do is, because we're doing 240 frames inclusive, so if you want to make it loop, make sure your first keyframe actually is on frame 0. Now, what is this keyframe here? There shouldn't be a keyframe here. We want to delete the keyframe. Now, on frame 0, you want the location Y of your camera to be 0, so just click this little box here that creates a keyframe for your camera. Go all the way to the end of your animation. Move this to 10. I'm sorry, my my webcam is moving around a lot. I haven't tweaked it enough. And do another keyframe. Now, if we go back to the beginning of our animation, hit 0 to look at the camera, press play. This is what our animation is going to look like. At the moment, it's probably moving at 30 frames a second, give or take. It's doing a little bit less than that thanks to performance. But you shouldn't see any particular noticeable, I mean, we do see the double, we see the double triangle at the end, but it's not too bad, all things considered. The way we could change that is bringing our base empty, making the rotation slightly less than 90 perhaps. We could look at something like, something odd. Maybe something like that. How does that look? That's not bad. That's not bad at all. So we end up with this nice little animation. Again, tweak the things how you like. Maybe I'm going to shove this to 15. Just keep it on 15, we'll see. And again, the lovely thing about Blender is you can go back and change all these things because it's all this is a roughly non-destructive process. The only destruction part of the process is the modeling right at the beginning, stage 1. But from here, we've set up our camera. Our camera goes along 10 meters. What we need to do now is materials. We need to create a base material for this object. After that, we're going to have a few stages of neating up the render, creating some volume effects, perhaps creating some background parts of the render, and we'll see where we go from there. Okie doke. Next step is to make a material, a nice neon material for your triangle object. So there is one very important step that I missed out earlier. We're going to correct that now. It's to do with working with materials when you are also using geometry nodes. Materials will not apply to an object. So if we go into viewport shading, or indeed if we go into our Eevee shader, what you will notice if we add a new material, it does not appear on our object at all, and that is because we have missed a crucial step. What we need to do is go to geometry nodes, make sure our triangle is selected, go into the geometry nodes object here, into the graph editor, not the graph editor, the node editor. Shift A, we want to set material. So we make sure the geometry to geometry input and output are selected, and we select our material that we're going to be using. Go back to layout. Material.001 is now in use. And if we, for instance, change the emission, we can see that that now changes. So we want to make a nice neon pink purpley material for this object. Let's go to our shading workspace up the top here. And what we're going to do is delete the principled BSDF. So we have currently got no material on our object. We also have the world shader. We can set the strength of that down to 0. And what we want to do is to create a kind of neon looking material all the way along for all of these objects. So how do you kind of create neon? There's loads of different ways, tons of different ways. The way I'm going to do it is with a mix shader. I'm actually going to combine 2 different shaders in order to make the neon material. So what we're going to do is actually have 2 emission shaders. So Shift D on that one, we end up with 2. Connect the top one to your shader at the top socket and the bottom one to the bottom. Set them both to 5.4 on the strength, and the colours can be kind of close to the pink and the purple. At the moment they're mixed with a factor of 50-50, so we're getting a literal true mix of the 2 colours. But what we want to do is use a very special node called the Fresnel node to make it so that the mix between them is based on the angle of your camera when you look at the object. So you'll see the edges are slightly darker than the inner. And that's kind of the effect you get when you use your neon. And that's kind of the effect that you're looking for when you're creating a neon style object. If we go back to layout, we'll see in our little preview that we get a nice effect on there. It's not quite as obvious because we don't have any volume in our world at the moment, which is kind of the next step I want to talk about. So save your project for now, and next we will work on the world shading. Okay, so how do we go from here to an amazing looking space scene? So it's not too complicated to set up. There are a few nodes to look out for. Make sure you're in the world shading mode here, and you've got your 2 preview windows here. You could probably get rid of one of them if you felt so inclined. And what we're going to be doing first of all is just adding a little bit, tiny teeny bit of volume to our scene. So what we're going to be doing is first of all adding a teeny tiny amount, and I mean a very small amount of volume to our scene, which kind of scatters the light that's being produced by our triangles here. So we're going to do Shift A, search for volume scatter. Now this is on way too high, so we want to bring that down to about 0.008. That is the kind of level that worked in my last render, and we're going to pump that into the volume. Now it doesn't really change all that much. If I take it off, you'll just notice it slightly dulls, slightly absorbs some of the light and scatters it just a little bit. You could probably turn it up just a touch, but that's going to be too much. So if we bring it down to like 0.00, 0.01, that kind of thing, 0.01, that's probably going to be enough for the scene. It just means we can also see the background going on that we're going to create now. There's quite a few nodes that I'm going to be bringing into this. The primary one that we're going to be using is just a mix node. Set that to color and pump that into the result. At the moment we're not going to get anything, we're just going to get white. And what we need is 2 noise textures. So we want one here, and then Shift D to duplicate it, just keep things simple. And if we pump these 2 into a color ramp, each of them are going to have their own color ramps. So again, Shift D, bring that down. And the output of these color ramps is going to come into A and B, respectively. So put the factor of the top one into the factor, and the same for the bottom, factor and factor. Now, the top one is going to be our stars, our tiny little stars. So in order to get that kind of star looking effect, we have to pump up the noise very, very high. Something like 700 gives you very minute style pixels on your screen. And what we then do is we clamp that effect using our color ramp. So you can have a lot of stars if you bring it left, or you can bring that effect down to only a few stars. That's the kind of level I'm having it at, around 700 on the position for black. Again, tweak it. If you want more stars, move your left-hand handle left. Now for this one, we're going to slightly lower the scale because we're going to create a kind of nebula effect. So on this color ramp, bring your color ramp in to kind of create clouds in the background. Not too heavy. You can get rid of all of them, or you can just bring in just a few. If you mess with the scale, you're going to get slightly more harsh edges on your clouds, so maybe that's what we're going to go with this time. And what color do you want those clouds to be? Well, if we swap over to the right hand handle on white, we can actually set the color of our clouds, and I would like them to be a kind of lilac color, maybe something a little bit darker, and that's what you end up with here is that kind of effect. But what you'll notice, if we go back into layout mode and we put ourselves in our camera position by pressing 0, when we press play, our nebulas and stars in the background are not moving, which doesn't really give us the sense that we're actually going anywhere in our warp tunnel effect. So how do we create that effect? Well, you can do something called mapping. If we pause our render and go back to our shading workspace, you can actually change over time how your textures are mapped onto the objects. So if we put a vector here and a vector here, what we can do is also we need a texture coordinate node to know where we're starting from. Take the generated, pop it into the vector. Now, what we can do is slowly and subtly rotate our Y over time. So if we put these X and Z back to 0, we could perhaps rotate those as well. And if we make sure, if we bring up our timeline here and go to timeline, make sure you're on 0. What we can do is set this to 0 initially and press I on your keyboard when you're highlighting a value to insert a keyframe. And then if we go to our end, maybe go to our middle, so 120 is going to be the middle. What you can do is subtly put this at like, let's go with 20 degrees. Press I again, inserts another keyframe. And then if you put this back to 0, press I again, what will happen is over time the nebulas and stars in the background are slowly going to rotate back and forth, which should just give us when we are in camera mode, just a slight notion that we are moving, which you'll see in the background. It'll be subtle, it won't be too heavy, but it'll be enough to give that sense that we're actually going somewhere. And with that being said, that is probably the end of all of the steps of our render. If we give ourselves time to render this out, you can again do it in Eevee or cycles, whichever one you like. I'd like to take a moment just to thank you all for watching this tutorial, and if you like this kind of video, please do give it a like and a thumbs up, and maybe put a comment of what kind of renders you'd like to see in the future. If there's any questions you have about this particular process, again, please do contact me on Twitter or pop it down in the comments of this video.